Good day to you. This is our third 10-minute presentation on this Saturday, the 6th of September. In this video, I'll be completing the lead-in, which was necessary in order to embrace the topic we wish to address to its conclusion now. The final phase of science is the synthetic phase, where you get the solution to your question. That's part of the scientific process. We're employing the scientific method, but in a philosophical context, by which we were able to prove is simply the conjugation of two forms of reality from a human consciousness reference frame. And that's saying a lot, but now we know what we're saying when we say that. This is part of the scientific process of condensation of information into transmissible form in order to compose a more complex proposition, which in this case has a relation involved called conjugality, which essentially, in an extended sense, you could say I discovered as a basic principle in the interpretation of the universe. That is called science, and so we are embarking on a scientific solution in a scientific process that concludes with this phase. What is your answer? So what is our question? This is the Polya method, which we've already been over in several videos, so you know I'm using an accreditable approach to this age-old question, which is what again? In the video sequence, we led up to at least how do we formulate that question, which is quite a process that's taken the entire history of humanity to this moment to somehow come up with a question that pertains to science, such that science might address and possibly answer it. Science is about answers. If it doesn't achieve its answers, it actually fails. And so we need to prove everything we say so that it's transmissible knowledge. In this case, we're in the synthetic stage at a very high level, where we're attempting to conjugate two realities which can go astray in a philosophically oriented discourse. This is strict science, so we're going to answer the question according to what can be proved, and therefore we must have some form of binary question. So what is our question that we wish to pose to science to answer the most important question ever asked by humanity or an individual human? And in the prior videos, we led up to a proof that is our framework. And you do need both if you're addressing ultimate reality. We also discerned that ultimate reality cannot have an address space unless it's dualistic, because of the nature of reality and consciousness, that you need a superpositional solution framework, such that it's not strictly speaking binary, because there's an overlap of two domains that will not be separated because they only occur together. And that's called a dualistic relationship in the most abstract way of stating that characteristic of a question. The question we wish to address has to do with the human equation, which I've carefully defined. You can reduce it to one of several binary sounding choices. You can either use your emotional system, in which case you should be dominated by love, fun, and the humanity, the gifts of the Holy Spirit. That's all irrational. But if you take our approach, because this is the best form of communication, and one way of stating what communication is for, in science, everything you say has to be provable. And that's really limiting from a philosophic point of view. But we can't get rid of the philosophic side because it attaches to the emotional side. Because love is irrational, but love is a dominant force in the human reality. We do know what love is. It's hard to define. It's a mini-splendored thing, but it is an emotion, and we feel it. So we are that kind of creature. That, unfortunately for science, leaves out a lot that we might talk about, because scientists can't get a real grip on love. Because it operates under a different axiomatic system than rational logic, which has a definite object that is objective, that is, its frame of reference for science, is binary. And so we're going outside the bounds of strict science by addressing the human equation in order to formulate our question to science to see if science can help us in our ultimate quest. And today I promised to give you the secret of the universe, which is, in fact, to begin with, you have to have the question that needs to be answered. So it's got to be a dilly. It's got to be a really comprehensive question. And that turns out to have been about half the difficulty, is coming up with a question for science. Because science is more limited in its scope. Because it doesn't deal with psychology. It can't. Because that leads to an involution situation, which is being addressed, and quite courageously. It has to be a little bit spooky doing that, because right away, you're going outside of what can be proved. But there are actually two different forms of proof. There are two different forms of truth functionality operative in human reality. And one of them seems to be irrational in comparison with rational logic, because it allows more. And this, of course, includes religion, which is what, again, we defined religion. It is the search for, we're going to have to give a symbolic name to the goal, because it's kind of like defining science or the meaning of life. There's no reference frame. So we have to make something up that's equivalent to a placeholder for infinity, in the sense of it being imaginary or undefined, but it's there. We just can't define what it is. In this approach, the Polya approach, we're attempting to formulate our question in scientifically addressable form. So what we want is origins. It turns out that I happen to be somewhat of a self-acclaimed master on this subject, because origins turns out to be motherlode. That's where you need to begin as a scientist, is where do certain things come from, because we need to know the reference frame for where these things come from. One is the theory of evolution, which is at the top of science, and has been for about a century, you could say. So that's just one example of the kind of question that science faces that has to do with religion. And so there is a conflict because of two different axiomatic systems that have a different basis of resolution. The solution space for the one side of the human reality is non-logical in the classic sense of scientific logic. You can't deal with emotion in the same way that you deal with measurements and propositional logic. Love, fun, faith, hope, whatever you think, peace, joy, man, just enjoying mankind, there's no conflicts left, something like that, seems a little bit it's a little bit out of reach. Men fight, they are at war, they have problems, but we still need solutions as individuals. No matter what the group is doing, or even any other entity, each human is alone and must answer this question in the reference frame which you're given. And that turns out to be point consciousness in a geometric construct, which then allows you to distinguish between the realm of consciousness, which is personal, and the realm of reality, which is transpersonal and subject to the rules of scientific investigation. So one of the origins we want is the origin of man, hotly debated, of course. And the other question we want answered is the origin of the myth. That is, where do we get this idea that we know who the first two humans are, to be able to say something like God must have created them because there's no other explanation for the first two humans? That's a serious question. Because there were two original humans. That's been proved by science, because of genetic transmission requires the sexual conjugation of male and female. Speciation cannot account for that in any way, because now you're talking about the speciation of a female version in correspondence with the male version, which must be absolutely coordinated throughout speciation. Well, that's just one example of billions of unanswerable paradoxes in Darwinian speciation, which he admitted. There's no mechanism. There's now known to be no possible mechanism. So that theory is invalid for humans. It has been proved to be invalid for humans. I say that it's provable that it's invalid for species, but actually I would be slightly wrong, so we're going to deal with that question. How did the species, about 2 million of them, about half of which are insects, but in the 1 million species that include mammals and birds, we're the end product of a speciation product according to extended Darwinism. He did come up with a genus descent mode, whereby there's a hierarchy in the speciation system, which I think is so well substantiated simply by his reports on the Galapagos Island finches that speciation is undeniable. The question then, which nobody's been able to answer for well over a century now, what is the mechanism? It was discovered and then immediately forgotten, which is a remarkable thing to say. That in the 1970s we cracked the genetic code of semiotic recombinant DNA. And it's definite now we disproved Darwin's theory of speciation because that's a locked code. So the species speciated by a non-physical method. There was speciation, we can see it, but it was non-physical. There is no mechanism. It can't have happened. So it happened, but it can't have happened according to science. It's not a religious question. It's a scientific question. Did the species speciate? I found direct proof that they did. The first direct proof that they did speciate. And it's from the record of Hanoch, whom in English is named Enoch. And his book is in the Heavenly Bible, I'll just put it that way. So it's part of the transmission, the original transmission, from which we got the historical evidence for Adam and Isha, now known as Adam and Eve because her name was changed. But her original name was Isha because she's a derivative of man. It has been proved by science that she is not a derivative. What she is a separate creation coordinated with Adam's physiology and psychology, because she has to be beautiful or they won't copulate naturally. She has to be absolutely gorgeous in his eyes, and the feeling has to be mutual so that they conjugate to produce the next generation. Well, that's called sex. And you cannot speciate that. So how did the animals speciate if the mechanism doesn't work for cellular organisms, all of which use the male-female conjugation, which cannot be derived? It cannot speciate. It has to be invented. And that's where all the horrific controversy focuses now, on the obviously scientifically proved fact that there had to be two humans to begin the race. And that's known from the ancient transmission. That is identified as the correct solution to the speciation problem for humans. They did not speciate. Now, what about the animals and plants? They did. Darwin proved that they did by direct observation, which cannot be refuted in my humble opinion. My opinion is not humble. I am not giving you my opinion. I'm telling you what the universe has taught to real scientists within the past 75 years. There was a sexual conjugation to invent our race, or we would not fall in sexual conjugal love. And Darwin wrote about that. So did Wallace. And everybody has written about it ever since, right up to I believe it was Desmond Morris, the naked ape. The naked ape. We don't have hair on our backs. So how the fuck did we We didn't. We did not speciate, and humans don't speciate. Every other genus does. We don't. The finches speciate from superfinch. Darwin proved that. Who engineered that? That had to be engineered by aliens. That has been indirectly proved to an incredible degree of confidence that the human race was put here. What about the ecology? I discovered the solution to that, and I'm going to divulge it now, and this is the secret of the ancient transmission, which unlocks the meaning of science. Why we have science was to discover what I discovered. They came back according to Hanok. Strictly speaking, they came back according to Noah, because Hanok did not survive the flood. He died before his grandson Noah died, and Noah was assisted in building that ark, which had to ride out a meteor strike that is now in Wikipedia and has been dated to less than 20,000 years ago by the Grand Canyon sequence, which is matched on the other side of the world with the Himalaya sequence. This world was struck within the past, being generous, 20,000 years. It's on the order of 10,000 years ago, because that's been dated by the sacred transmission. And therefore there must be some secret that was vouchsafed by Adam, Hanok, and Noah before the flood, so that after the flood they could be accredited as having known the origin of the world, which they did and stated. It's the future appearance of the elect one. And that is what is religion, and that's the only correct definition of religion, because it's scientifically proved. We'll be back with an extension to this. Thank you for your patience, and sorry for the cramped quarters here. This is a cell phone production. Keep looking up. We'll be back later today with the wisdom that gets you into the kingdom of heaven. That's the goal of science, and always has been. We'll be right back. Thank you.